Section 4. We have almost completed this journey, and I hope I have not bored you up to this point. So what do my considerations look in reality in humans from the little bit that was measured at all? First of all, before I go into full extent of this discussion about reality, I must briefly explain a concept that is often misunderstood. When we talk about genes, we don't just mean the DNA blueprints that code for proteins, but also the transcribed mRNA, which is the intermediate molecule that carries the instructions from DNA and is subsequently translated into proteins. Said with that, let's turn the attention back to the main focus of this discussion: signal transduction. I would first like to discuss with you in more detail a paper that has been with me for more than 3 years now, since it first appeared as a preprint and was later supplemented by 8 younger healthy with 1-dose BNT162b2 transfected patients. I would then like to share a few thoughts on why I think the T cells will wear themselves out on most transfected cells and cell death seems rather unlikely. And finally, I would like to point out absolutely necessary investigations that are more than urgently needed, but also seems to be very problematic due to the design and needed equipment, cause most labs which could do won't do them in the name of follow the science, trademarked by Bill Gates. So let me first go into this paper. BNT162b2 vaccination enhances interferon JAK-STAT regulated antiviral programs in COVID-19 patients infected with the SARS-CoV-2 beta variant. It appeared in 2021 as a preprint and almost no one drew attention on it. What the authors Knabel and his colleagues did here in an experiment was a broad-based GSEA-CAG shotgun analysis that also makes it possible to measure activated signal transduction if the signaling molecule is a protein. The study is a complete annoying paper, which I will explain briefly in a moment. Nevertheless, it already provides the first indications of profoundly dysregulated transcription factors and catastrophic signaling abnormalities. They used a log2 record, which therefore will exclude some confounders. They defined a value of p less than 0.05 up to p less than 0.00001 was considered statistically significant. The confounding factors in the older group, consisting of 3 transfected hospitalized versus 5 infected hospitalized, are huge, ranging from dexamethasone, poorly matched age matching, to inconsistent GSEA analysis. Normally, a cleanly performed GSEA shotgun analysis should be expected to follow up a fixed set of genes at all time points. It is therefore at best an initial suspicion that can be seen here. Nevertheless, the KRAS, an isoform of the RAS GTPase protein of MAPk, the mitogen activated protein kinase, more than stood out. So the question is compelling when compared against the 8 healthy one-time transfected as to why this significantly overexpressed activated gene observed over several weeks was not mentioned anywhere. It is also not clear from the methodology section why they cherry-picked 166 genes in the final analysis. And as you can see already, there was a massive gene expression alteration in the transcriptome. What annoys me so much about this study, they did not maintain any consistency in their analysis. From datasheet 1 to 2, which then compared second dose versus third dose, there were suddenly only just roundabout over 900 genes listed, whereas on the third sheet, first versus third, there were well over 2,000. Even the labeling seems a bit cryptic, with the brackets around some of the numbers, as there is no proper legend. Most likely it is meant to represent negative values. And the 8 younger aged healthy people they included later, they took only 166 cherry-picked genes, not even following their own definition of significance, as shown in this example, from supplementary 3 for first versus second. Anyway, as I have hopefully been able to show stringently logically, there is no way around the dysregulated signal transduction network if the membrane has been penetrated and the endosomal lysosomal pathway is already disrupted. And that fits with a strongly overexpressed signaling cascade that Knabe et al. Didn't even mention in their strange discussion, which I'll get to in a moment. mTORC 1, a signal that even in extreme sports should still be activated at most 48 hours later, was clearly overexpressed in the younger ones after one dose. And keep in mind that the samples were taken between day 7 to day 10, so it is a clearly overexpressed signaling. Quote, we found that vaccinated patients demonstrated enrichment in p53 regulated cell cycle arrest genes, specifically CCNA1, E2F8, and E2F1, consistent with the possibility of higher p53 activity levels in the vaccinated patients. Interestingly, E2F8 but not CCNA1 or E2F1 was modestly upregulated 7 days post-vaccination in the naive vaccinated individuals, 1.5-fold p-adjusted 0.04. End of quote. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the quote, but as far as I know, the interactions between E2F1 and 7 as well as 8 Knabe et al. Describe a silent, smoldering cell cycle dysregulation in immune cells, because it seems virtually impossible for E2F1 not to undergo a change in the cycle if the expression of E2F8 changes, and that over a period of 10 days. Further dysregulation, but different in the older young cohorts, was found for oligoadenylate synthetase 1, 2, and 3. What's remarkable, the whole text part of the study is a consistent inconsistency in the sense of omitting that, for example, the STAT3 interleukin-6 axis is not mentioned at all, which can lead to hellish feedback loops, and at the same time with interleukin-4, which also underwent alterations in expression, could force the perfect preconditions for IgG4 switches. So, a consistent gene expression analysis would allow us to work through the GSEA data piece by piece. In the end, the real question is, why were 166 genes selectively cherry-picked that best fit the description of the immune response? However, that there were profound gene expression alterations is consistent with the data of Johannes D. Knapp and Aditi Bhargava. In this slide, I have highlighted some of the most important indications of alterated transcription factors and signaling pathway alterations. Unfortunately, we again have the problem of low sample availability. The authors compared female and male transfected before and after vaccination and looked for specific sex differences. Said with that, this brings me to my thoughts on statements such as, the immune system simply kills all spiked cells. If such significant and profound expression alteration was observed and the signaling cascades are completely wrong triggered, it should come as no surprise that the entire maturation of the immune cells is already disrupted and incorrectly triggered. As reported in these two papers, the authors observed extreme overexpression of programmed death ligand 1. This will have a negative impact on natural killer cells and CD8 plus T cells. One could of course argue that there are still the natural killer cells killing those transfected cells. However, following some papers, like the one just displayed, NK cells have also been affected. This paper shows a clear T-cell overactivation. Both the CD8 plus and CD4 plus T helper cells have downregulated TIM3 surface protein. This in turn points to hyperactivation, which is typically observed in chronic inflammatory conditions or persisting pathogen exposure. Since TIM3 is also downregulated on natural killer cells, it seems that the natural killer cells must take on the role of CD8 plus T cells. Overall, the publication showed that the NK subsets such as CD56 bright, CD56 dim did not shift, and only NKG2A, a subset of the natural killer cells, decreased, while NK2GC increased over time after the third dose. indicating acute immune dysregulation. Pardon me for not attempting to pronounce the first author's name. I'm afraid of tongue knots. Even so, this paper is methodologically very questionable and poorly designed. It fits perfect into a puzzle as it aligns with another publication that showed an acute activation of CD16 natural killer cells, which however did not continue to increase after second dose. This indirectly suggests that a shift in immune reactivity occurred. This unfortunately also aligns with a paper by Girl et al., which had shown a CD8 plus depletion after 6 months. The Girl et al. Study is also consistent with the reports and papers on so-called breakthrough infections, trademarked by Pfizer, which were observed after 5 to 6 months at the latest. It thus seems plausible that the natural killer cells likely have to take on the role of CD8 plus cells. This already makes it quite unlikely that any part of the immune system can properly deal with the source of the inflammation and spike production, namely the transfected cells, without leading to a slow wear and tear response. In addition, as I have already pointed out, endosomal and mitochondrial damage must be assumed too, which will have an extremely negative impact on the ATP balance. Cell death requires extreme energy, and cells also act autonomously and can evade cell death if their programs run incorrectly. To emphasize my statements about the epigenetic consequences I mentioned in an earlier section, I would like to draw your attention to the following studies, which you can see on the slide. As epigenetics would be a whole topic in itself, I would just like to mention it here. So, what are my conclusions? We urgently need clean cohorts with transcriptomics, proteomics, and genomics analysis, and also epigenomics, in order to understand the fundamental far-reaching changes. These should be matched as precisely as possible. Furthermore, a differentiation must be made. Initial signals and subsequent damage, such as cumulative effects of modRNA, plus cumulative damage of DNA contamination, plus cumulative damage of spikes, plus cumulative damage of so-called frame-shifted proteins, plus possible contaminations of endotoxins, to find a truly custom-fit therapeutic solution. Due to the membrane alterations, it is such a randomized and manifold sequence of cascades that it seems plausible that we currently see no clear patterns from an epidemiological point of view, and yet we see an extreme excess mortality since 2021, and a striking drop in the birth rates. As I am not a doctor or scientist, I can only use my understanding to bring the therapeutic approach of high-quality lipid therapy into play in order to get the membrane aging back into better conditions, to some extent at last. And of course, flavonoids like quercetin, bicalin, etc. seems to be plausible, and the approach of improving their bioavailability in order to rebalance signal transduction. In conclusion, unfortunately, I can only conclude that I'm cautiously pessimistic about being able to completely undo these damage cascades, and I doubt that we have already seen the full extent of the damage, as much of the damage caused, especially at the cellular level, takes years to become truly noticeable, as I explained with my gear analogy. You can find my thoughts, as I mentioned earlier, in much more detail and with dozens of papers linked on Substack, Genervtes newsletter. I would also like to thank Dr. Adriana Radler-Pohl, who gave me a very good basic understanding of signal transduction, and Maria Gutschi, who helped me with the pharmacokinetics aspects and put my presentation through its paces. I can also warmly recommend the Substack of Doorless Carp.